Hi, my name's Cole and welcome back to Philosophy. Today I'll be talking to you about Timothy Hsiao's defense of factory farming and explain the rationale of his claim that animals don't have a moral standing. Human beings are undoubtedly at the top of the animal kingdom, but we share a world with over 2 million other species of animals. When interacting with our fellow man, we're expected to uphold certain moral principles. These principles can vary slightly between cultures, but overall, the core of what makes up our moral obligation to humans is shared between us all. What's less defined is our moral obligation to animals. Animal rights groups such as PETA have devoted their lives to the protection of animals. According to Farm Forward, about 9 billion chickens, 34 million cows, 129 million pigs, and over 2 million sheep were killed in 2021. Others, such as philosopher Timothy Hsiao, make the argument that factory farming is a morally permissible practice because animals don't have the ability to reason, and therefore they don't have a moral standing. Hsiao argues that the absence of moral standing means that humans don't have an obligation to act morally towards animals, but at the same time, he says that humans must not be cruel to animals for the sake of preserving our own human decency. Now, before we dive into Hsiao's beliefs, we must analyze how Hsiao refutes many other philosophical ideas that support giving moral status to animals. The first of those ideas is the mere considerability argument. The mere considerability argument was proposed by philosopher Mylan Engel Jr., and the argument states that if a being is able to feel pain, then it has some sort of degree of moral status. Engel also draws a direct connection between causing harm to an animal and wronging an animal. She says that it is a morally prohibited thing to harm an entity without moral justification. Now, Hsiao offers his refutation of the mere considerability argument by refuting the basic premise of Engel's argument, which is that harming equals wronging. Hsiao defines harm as causing a setback in something's welfare. Hsiao says that there are moral harms and non-moral harms. For example, crashing your car harms the car, but it does not morally wrong your car. And on the flip side, changing your car's oil, putting gas into it, is good for your car, but it is not morally good for it. The point Hsiao is trying to make is that the ability to feel pain doesn't automatically confer value onto a being, because if it did, then all harms would be moral harms, which is disproved through the car analogy. Another philosopher by the name of Sejin Brewers tries to make the argument that sentience is morally salient because pain involves the frustration of preferences. Hsiao doesn't see how this could be different from the other welfare conditions. Hsiao uses an example that water matters to a plant and oil matters to a car to show that just because something matters to a being doesn't make that thing somehow gain morality because of it. Hsiao then pivots to talk specifically about preferences and how they're marks of agencies. So unlike plants, animals can take direct action to pursue their own welfare interests, but why would this be special? Hsiao says it isn't. Actually, it's just one way a being can seek to fulfill its welfare interests. Hsiao says that there's no way to effectively differentiate between activity and the other forms of welfare fulfillment. With this being said, if animal activity has more significance, then plant activity would also have to have a moral significance. This would result in all forms of food consumption becoming immoral, and industries that use plant materials would be deemed immoral as well. So next we can look at how Hsiao refutes the idea that animals have a moral consciousness and his guidelines for a being to possess a moral standing. Hsiao says that for a being to have a moral status, it must have the capacity to reason. Hsiao also proposes that morality can be divided into two parts, which are knowledge and action. Hsiao defines knowledge as the understanding of what is good and bad for oneself, and action as the free will to act on the basis of that knowledge. Without the knowledge of what's good and evil, a being can't take appropriate moral action. It's because of the lack of moral knowledge that animals don't have a moral standing. Hsiao, through his tiger's trial analogy, argues that it would be absurd to hold a trial for a tiger who killed a gazelle. Hsiao goes further by saying that if animals were rational beings, they would be subject to the same moral obligations to each other, just as we humans are to each other. They would also be obligated to prevent each other from being harmed, which would result in all sorts of absurd scenarios. Humans would never view one animal hunting another as murder because we know that animals are acting in their own natural state and nature has no moral constraints. Hsiao says that since animals operate with no morality, they themselves do not have a moral standing. Now let's look at how Hsiao refutes the arguments made in the marginal human objection. The basic premise of the marginal human objection is that if animals don't have a moral standing because they can't reason, but infants and the mentally disabled do have a moral status despite their lack of reasoning skills, then the ability to reason can't be the defining factor of morality. Now, Hsiao says that although babies and the mentally disabled can't reason, they possess rational nature. In the marginal cases mentioned, it is the manifestation of reasoning skills that is absent, not the capacity to reason itself. Hsiao shows his thoughts through the blind baby and rock experiment. So, a rock and a baby are both born blind. Although both lack vision, they differ because the rock was never meant to see while the baby should be able to see. Now, it's a root capacity for babies to be able to see while it's not for a rock. Root capacities are what dictate the growth and developmental process and even the proper functioning of an organism or thing. So since all humans, regardless of any disabilities or their stage in development, since all humans have the root capacity to reason, all marginal cases are invalid, according to Hsiao. We've heard a lot about the arguments that Hsiao has refuted, but what does he think about how humans should treat animals? Let's take a look at Hsiao's views on the treatment of animals. Hsiao clearly states that humans may use animals for food, experimentation, aid, and among other things. However, just because animals don't have a moral standing doesn't mean humans can abuse or otherwise mistreat animals. Humans cannot partake in animal cruelty or torture, but not to protect the animal, but as to not corrupt a person's own character. Hsiao defines animal cruelty as the taking pleasure in causing suffering to an animal. So since both humans and animals can suffer, the pleasure someone finds in causing an animal to suffer would be similar to the pleasure they might feel in causing a human to suffer. The corruption of one's character can cause them to be more inclined to commit violence against other humans. We often see this in serial killers in their childhood. They may torture or kill animals for fun, and it develops into their later years and a lot of problems. Since the problem with animal cruelty is one of human character and not related to the well-being of animals, it's not necessary to attribute moral status to an animal for the Anti-Animal Cruelty Act to be upheld. Under Hsiao's definition of what constitutes animal cruelty, it really varies person to person. So, for example, John Doe can work his whole life chopping off chicken heads in a factory and go home to his wife and kids and lead a normal life. But on the other hand, you could have Hannibal Lecter or Jeffrey Dahmer work at the same factory, chopping off the same chicken heads, but they would get pleasure in causing suffering to the chickens. But what if the factory farm killed dogs instead? Well, while we in the West see dogs as pets and, a man's best friend, some cultures in Asia see dogs as just another form of food. On the flip side, people in India hold cows in high regard because of their spiritual significance, but we in the West just, see them as a living cheeseburger. Different societies confer value on the different species of animals, so what is seen as torture and cruelty towards an animal in one culture can be seen as an act meant towards securing a food source in another. In conclusion, Hsiao defends the practice of factory farming by noting the differences between humans and animals in terms of their innate nature and grants moral significance exclusively to humans. Now, Hsiao also clarifies that cruelty towards animals is wrong because of what it does to people who participate in animal cruelty, not because of any moral obligations to animals. So, how does Hsiao's explanation of the permissibility of factory farming sit with you? Do you believe that the ability to reason alone is a testament of moral capacity? I encourage you to look further into this controversial issue with an open mind and come to your own conclusion about the ethics of factory farming. As always, smash that like button and subscribe for more philosophy.